National Geographic Kids, Frederick Douglass, by Barbara Kramer. Who was Frederick Douglass? Frederick Douglass was born a slave. He worked hard for his master for no money. His master told Douglass where to live, what to eat, and what to do. After 20 years as a slave, Douglass escaped. He began speaking out against slavery. He didn't stop until all slaves were free. Then he worked to help freed slaves have better lives. Born a slave. Douglass was born in February 1818 on a farm in Talbot County, Maryland, USA. Soon after his birth, his mother was sent to work on another farm. Douglass only saw her 4 or 5 times. She died when he was 7. He never knew his father. Douglass spent his early years with his grandparents. They lived in a cabin about 12 miles from his master's farm. That's a fact. Douglass's grandfather was a free man, but his grandmother was a slave. She took care of slaves who were too young to work. When Douglass was about 6 years old, his grandmother took him to their master's farm. She didn't want to leave him there, but she had to do what their owner said. Douglass knew then that he was expected to obey the master too. About 2 years later, Douglass was sent to Baltimore, Maryland, to work. He had heard stories about that city and was excited to go. In his own words, "I didn't know I was a slave until I found out I couldn't do the things I wanted." In his time. In the 1820s, growing up a slave was very different from growing up as a child who was free. School. Slaves did not attend school. Teaching a slave to read was against the law in some states. An education would give a slave power. Events. Some people helped slaves escape from their masters. The group of people who led slaves to safety was called the Underground Railroad. Travel. Slaves who traveled without their owners had to carry a pass from their masters. Black people who were free had to carry papers saying they were not slaves. Rights. Slaves had no rights. Slaves were listed as property along with the slave owner's animals. They could be sold to other slave owners at any time, often separating children from their parents. Freedom. When their masters died, a few slaves were given their freedom, but most got new owners, so they were still not free. Sometimes slaves could buy their freedom, but since most slaves did not earn money for their work, that rarely happened. Learning to read. In Baltimore, Douglass worked for Hugh Auld and his wife. He took care of their young son and ran errands. Mrs. Auld started teaching Douglass to read. Mr. Auld told her to stop. He said slaves should know only one thing, how to obey their master. But Douglass kept learning. He gave biscuits to poor white children he met on his errands. In return, they helped him read. That's a fact. With 50 cents Douglass earned from polishing shoes, he bought a book of famous speeches and read it many times. When Douglass was 15, he was sent back to the farm. His master had died. He now had a new owner. Douglass had to work hard in the field. He was often treated badly. He tried to escape, but he was caught. Other slave owners were angry. Douglass had set a bad example for their slaves. To avoid trouble, Douglass's new master sent Douglass back to Baltimore to work for the Auld family again. That's a fact. When Douglass was working as a field slave, he held secret classes to teach other slaves to read. Runaway slave. In Baltimore, Douglass met free black people. He fell in love with a free black woman named Anna Murray. More than ever, he wanted to be free. On September 3rd, 1838, he tried to escape again. He headed north by boat and train. If he were caught, he might be killed or sold. But he made it to New York, a free state. He sent for Anna, and they got married. That's a fact. Over time, Douglass and Anna had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Douglass and Anna moved to New Bedford, Massachusetts, USA. There, Douglass met people who wanted to abolish slavery. In 1841, he spoke at one of their meetings. Douglass told the crowd about his life as a slave. The people liked his speech. Douglass soon began traveling to many states giving speeches about slavery. He also wrote a book about his life as a slave. In his own words, "I longed to have a future with hope in it." Douglass had escaped, but he was still a slave. Soon he became well known for his speeches and his book. That put him in danger. Now it was easier for his master to find him. Douglass had to get away, but it meant leaving his family behind. He sailed to England. He gave speeches there and made many friends. They raised money to buy his freedom. At last, Douglass was free. 6 cool facts about Douglass. 1. As a young man in Baltimore, Douglass learned to play the violin. It was a hobby he enjoyed the rest of his life. 2. Douglass met with President Abraham Lincoln 3 times during the Civil War. After the president died, Mrs. Lincoln gave her husband's favorite walking stick to Douglass. 3. Douglass became active in the Underground Railroad. His home in Rochester, New York, was a stopping place. Runaway slaves could hide there until it was safe to travel to the next stop. Today, people can visit there. 4. Douglass was known as a great storyteller. He often made family, friends, and audiences laugh with his tales. 5. Douglass wrote 3 books about his life: Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, My Bondage and My Freedom, and Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. 6. In 1899, 4 years after Douglass died, a statue of him was built in Rochester, New York. It was the first time an African American was honored with the statue. A fight to end slavery. In 1847, Douglass returned to the United States. He moved his family to Rochester, New York. There he started a newspaper called the North Star. He wrote articles against slavery for the paper. People in the United States did not agree about slavery. That led to the start of a civil war in 1861. Douglass organized a group of African Americans to fight in that war. That's a fact. 2 of Douglass's sons were among the first African Americans to sign up to fight in the Civil War. New beginnings. The Civil War led to the end of slavery, but black people were still not treated the same as white people. Douglass gave speeches about treating all people the same. In 1882, Anna got sick and died. Douglass was sad and lonely. About 2 years later, he married Helen Pitts. That upset many people because Helen was white. In his own words, "I would unite with anybody to do right and with nobody to do wrong." That's a fact. Douglass also gave speeches about allowing women to vote. Douglass never stopped speaking out to help others. On February 20th, 1895, he gave a speech to a women's group. He died at home later that day. He was 77 years old. Douglass was a powerful voice for those who believe that all people should be treated equally. Today, his words still inspire others all over the world. In his own words, abolition of slavery had been the deepest desire and the great labor of my life.